All right. Hello again, adventurers, and welcome to another exciting daily vlog. This is Daily Vlog 2025, number 279. And today, I have a weird thing that I want to talk about. So, fun fact. When I was in high school, my senior year, I needed a social studies credit. And how can I say this politely? I vehemently despised with every fiber of my being social studies classes that I did taken. Like, I just absolutely despised them. They were the worst things ever. I hated them so much. And some of it was just like social studies was just not my thing, which is really funny because now I'm actually really into social sciences and stuff like that. The other half was we had some epically, spectacularly bad social studies teachers. Like we had, I took they had a psychology course that was taught by one of the social studies teachers. For the life of me, I cannot remember this woman's name, but if there is justice in this world, she is no longer teaching students. She was a relatively new teacher. Like she was in her like mid-20s, relatively recent college graduate, had just finished her student teachings stuff. And so I had her for my freshman year. I had two different social studies teachers because we switched at the semester. My first one was the one that nobody wanted because his view on grading was if you did everything you were supposed to in the class, you got a B. The only way you could get an A is if you did some form of extra credit, because an A meant that you were, spectacular in some way. So if you aced every single test in his class, did absolutely everything you were supposed to, you would get a B. And he was a cool dude. He made us memorize the presidential cabinet because the class we were taking was civics. And so we learned about presidential succession, and we knew every member of the presidential cabinet at that point in time because it changes randomly. Like, it was a tough course. The other teacher that we got was the one that I eventually took psych with. And like I said, she was a new teacher. She tended to be more fun than that other guy. But dear God, did she have the most overinflated ego I've ever dealt with. Like, one of our favorite things in psychology, something that is very common is you use the word interpret, because a lot of psychology is interpreting certain things. And so on one of the first papers we turned in, one of my friends had written the word interpret in there just because it was part of it. And she circled it, crossed it out, and wrote next to it interpret. Not interpret, interpet. She took out the R, and she claimed that that student had misspelled it. All of us, because I was in this class, was like three of my friends. All of us just sat there going, that's not the real word, is it? That can't be. And so we looked it up. No, that's how you spell interpret. Interpret has an extra R in there. She just, for some odd reason, learned the word wrong. And even as, I think we were freshman or sophomore, even a freshman or sophomore in high school, we were already thinking, this is a psychology class. I wonder if this is a psychology. Like, I wonder if she's intentionally doing something wrong as a way to teach us some. No, it wasn't. She literally just thought that it was interpret. And would mark us down, like would reduce our grade every time we quote unquote spelled it wrong. So we spent an entire semester in psychology finding how many times we could insert the word interpret into everything we turned in. So she was just god awful, and she really gave me this strong distaste for social studies in general. I did not want to take any of the junior or senior um, social studies classes. They just were all insanely boring to me. I had taken, I think, AP US History my sophomore year, and while it was very interesting, again, I got stuck with another teacher whose ego was just so ginormously massive, and he also was a massive creep that used to, I mean, I won't go into details, but suffice it to say, the girls in my class did not enjoy being in that class. We'll put it that way. I don't think anything he did was outright illegal, but it was super, super creepy and just sus. So anyway, I just had a really, really bad opinion of social studies in general, but I needed a social studies credit. So, because I was a band geek, I talked to my band teachers and I said, hey, I need a social studies credit. Could I, like, do a study on music of the world? And one of the band directors, who became a pretty good friend of mine, who's unfortunately passed away. He was the jazz band director. We spent tons of time together because I was in the band room all the time, and then I was in jazz band, and I had a Dixieland band that I ran, and I was in multiple jazz combos, and he was the supervising teacher for all of that. So, and then for jazz band at the end of the year, we would always have a cookout at his house, which was literally like right down the street from where I lived. Like, because I lived like here, and then the road went like this, and then he lived here. We could see each other from our backyards. Like, that's how close we lived. I didn't know that when we moved there. I didn't know the guy when we moved there, but so anyway, yeah, he had done an entire course in college on world music, and so he gave me his book. I still have it in a box somewhere. I was supposed to give it back, and it just never happened. But he gave me this book with an accompanying CD, and he said, "But if you want a social studies credit for it, you have to get a social studies teacher to monitor your independent study." That's what they were called, were independent studies. And so I went to the one teacher that everybody hated that I had a begrudging respect for, because while yes, he had a hard class, he wasn't the egomaniacal bastard that the other social studies teachers were. He was a very down-to-earth person, and he had a background in music. He actually used to sing barbershop and things like that, and so that was going to be essential for me being able to do this. And so I went up to him, and again, I'm going to leave him nameless because I would never want, despite the fact that all I'm going to say about him is good things, I just don't like revealing people that don't know they're being talked about. So I went up to him, and his wife. The reason I said his wife taught English, and I had her as my English teacher, and he was super awesome. His wife had an ego problem, which is true of a lot of teachers I found more recently. But anyway, so getting back to that. I go, hey, I want to do this thing. He's like, okay, well, why are you coming to me? I said, well, you had the toughest social studies course that I had. So if I pick you as my advisor, I'm obviously going to have to learn something. And he's like, okay, all right, well, how are we going to do this? I said, well, basically, I will study everything. And I came up with my own lesson plan and everything like that. And I said, basically, I think it was Fridays, I will come in after school and I will basically teach you what I learned. He's like, okay, I'm good with that. And so that's what I did for an entire semester. I would go in and I would teach him all this stuff. And I remember specifically when we were doing, I was learning about American music. Fun fact, American music can all be traced back to some version of jazz. Like every American musical style can be traced back to jazz in some way, shape, or form. And one of the earliest versions of jazz is a style called Dixieland, which is phenomenally awesome. I love it. I used to play it. It is use a lot. Use a lot. It uses a lot of polyrhythmic things where you have multiple kind of rhythms going at the same time, and a lot of poly. I can't remember what the other one is called. Poly music. So you have these musical lines that are kind of intertwining, but they're not like doing all this harmonizing and stuff like that. They're playing these two counterpoint and counter melodies against each other, and it's just amazingly fun. And it's built off of improvisation. It's amazing. So for American music, the section that I focused on for that day was the 12-bar blues. And so I had to teach him what a 12-bar blues was. And so I went to his board, and again, he's a social studies / history teacher. So he has all these maps and charts and things like that, and he had just finished teaching, and so a lot of them were down. And so I just went over to his board, and I just went and I got everything up, and I started drawing a music staff on the board, and he just looked at me like I was crazy, and I go, "What?" He's like, "You got that up in one try." I said, "Yeah, why? That's how it's supposed to work." He's like, "But it doesn't work. Have you ever thought about being a teacher?" I'm like, no, I don't want to be a teacher. At that point, he's like, "I want to be an actor." Now I'm a trainer, which is basically a teacher without a union. So I taught him 12-bar blues and everything like that. And yeah, like I said, he said, "You should really be a teacher." And I've had quite a few other friends and colleagues and things like that going, "Why didn't you ever go into teaching?" And there's a number of reasons why I never went into teaching. Probably the biggest of which was I hated school vehemently. I was a bully magnet. Again, I had a remarkably large number of teachers that were extremely arrogant, and due to my own, abuse, survival, and stuff like that, I had become kind of not really standoffish. Like I was a doormat most of the time, but I had this kind of developed sense of justice. And so while I would do what I was told, I would kind of speak out and go, "This is wrong," or anytime I thought something was happening that I thought shouldn't be, I would speak out about it, but then I would do what I was told. And that pissed off a lot of teachers because they have the ones that I dealt with had this kind of moral superiority complex where it's like, "Oh no, I am the most amazing, wonderful person in the world, and I am molding young minds. I am a martyr because I don't get paid anywhere near what I am worth." And I used to believe that until I got into retail and realized that teachers make shit tons of money compared to retail employees. Let me tell you. And we're not even going to talk about benefits. So anyway, the reason I am telling this story, there is a YouTuber who, again, shall remain nameless, mostly because this isn't about them specifically, but it does bring up kind of an interesting idea that I've been thinking about for a while. This particular YouTuber belongs to TeacherTube or Teacher TikTok. And basically, if you're not familiar, there's kind of a sub group on YouTube and then definitely on TikTok where it's all teachers. And they talk about, what they do, and they have stories about being a teacher and all this stuff. And I started watching her content because, another fun fact, in college the first time, I majored in theater and I minored in music. And so because of that, I was surrounded all the time by theater majors and music majors. And if anyone is unaware, if you decide to major in music in general, there's technically two paths you can go on. You can major in music performance, which basically you declare an instrument, which might be vocals, or it could be a more traditional instrument like a piano or a saxophone or something like that. And then you obsess over it for 4 years to the point that you think about ritually destroying it in the most elaborate fashions possible on a monthly basis. Um, Music performance majors spend like 90% of their life either rehearsing with a group or stuck in a practice room. Like, it's nonsense how much work these people put into that. But when you get a degree in music performance, it kind of works well as a paperweight. And the reason being, a music performance degree does nothing for you, because the job that you're wanting to get is a professional musician. Generally, most of the music performance majors I knew wanted to become members of like symphony orchestras or things like that, because they're very, very difficult to get into. And while yes, they will look at your credentials and go, "Oh, you graduated magna cum laude from this particular school, which is known for its music program," that will get you in the door, which is nice. But the way you get your job in professional music is by being good at your instrument. And specifically, being good at your instrument in the specific subgenre of music you're auditioning for. So you could be the most prolific jazz saxophonist in the world. And if you audition for the London Symphony Orchestra, they're really not going to care, because jazz is not the same as symphonic music. Like it's completely different style of music. It requires a completely different method of playing. There's no improvisation. Well, I mean, technically there is a little bit if you're doing like a concerto or something like that. But even that, it's not the same as jazz improvisation. Let's put it that way. So yeah, the other group, which was significantly more common, were music education majors. And not only that, so I was surrounded by music education majors. I was also friends with a bunch of music education majors from my time in high school, because most of the band geeks went into music education. So I am remarkably familiar with academia and the education world as it relates to music education. Fun fact, if you think teachers have it hard, wait till you see what happens to music teachers in general. Because unlike core curriculum teachers, the union not only will not protect their jobs, they will throw them to the wolves if it means that their the core core subject teachers, math, science, English, and I can't remember what the fourth one is. Anyway, if it means that those teachers will be able to keep their raises and things like that. And I have seen it over and over and over again. Music, theater, the arts in general, but music tends to be the first one that is on the chopping block. Just get fucked over completely by everyone. It's not just the unions. I have a very negative opinion of unions. I've been in a union. I've dealt with unions before. I wrote a paper on unions when I was in college. I've done extensive study into unions. The vast majority of them are massively corrupt and tend to cost their members a hell of a lot more than they ever make them. But that's neither here nor there. The thing that fucks over music teachers is not only do the unions not protect them, but school boards in general just don't like music programs because they're very expensive and they don't bring in money. Compared to almost literally any other program, you can somehow find a way to get money out of it. You can't with a music program, especially if you have a band program, because just things like instrument rentals. When I was in high school, a bassoon cost $80,000. So they're cheaper now. You can now get bassoons for like five to 10 grand. But they used to be $80,000. So anyway, this particular teacher YouTuber thing, because they have a podcast and they do TikTok and they do YouTube and stuff like that. I started watching their stuff because it was interesting. I had friends in education, and so I was kind of familiar with some of the stuff that they dealt with. And then they got to talking about, oh yeah, I was a teacher for 2 years. And that blew my mind. Because 2 years, in my opinion, is not enough to be able to declare yourself, oh, I'm a teacher. Like if I had been, declare yourself, oh, I'm a teacher in an authoritative manner. Oh, I'm a teacher and I'm going to talk about my experience as a teacher. You don't really have experience as a teacher. You only did it for 2 years. And again, when you factor in things like summer break, you basically only did it for barely over a year and a half. And most of your experiences are 1 or 2 time experiences. And this is true about everything, like retail management. I was a retail manager. How long were you a retail manager for? 10 years, roughly. I had some unemployment periods in there, but as far as like the actual time I was employed in retail management in general, or doing something related to retail management, was around 10 years. And I knew managers that had been in there for 15 or 20 years were still considered the new guys. I knew managers that had 30, 40 years experience in management. And so the idea of like, I was really good as a retail manager. And within, I think it was 6 or 9 months of my promotion into management, I was effectively given a store. I wasn't a store manager, but the district manager came in and said, okay, you are in charge of sales for this store going forward. I'm going to let the general, the store manager of the store, he's going to deal with everything except sales. I'm going to specifically tell him you are not to touch sales anymore. Sales is Jody's job. And he actually sat down like for 20 minutes and walked me through, this is a P&L report. This is how you can read this. Like he taught me how to read all the numbers and everything. And I ran sales for the busiest store in the busiest district in the company or in the country. I don't know about outside the US, but in the US, we were the busiest district in, and I was the busiest store in the busiest district. If I remember correctly, that particular store did something like, I want to say it was a few million a year. I can't remember if it was under 10 million or around 30 million a year, which again doesn't sound like a massive amount, but this was small box retail. Big box retail like Home Depot or Walmart, they'll do hundreds of millions. Like a single store can do 100 million in a year and not bat an eye. Small box retail, once you start getting above a million, that's a pretty busy store. So again, within 9 months, my understanding and my kind of leadership in management was acknowledged enough that I was given a chance to run a very risky store, and I succeeded spectacularly. So much so that when I felt no longer good at this particular store, I immediately went to the district manager and said, hey, I'd like to try another store. And I was transferred to a store in an even worse place, which took me about a year to completely turn around. So in the first couple years of me in retail management, I had turned around 2 stores that people with 20 or 30 years experience could not have turned around. If I had quit right after that and just stopped retail management completely, I don't think I would have considered myself a manager. I worked in it for a little while, but I was still relatively new. And especially for things like a teacher, like so much of what a teacher does doesn't repeat technically until you get to the next year, or at least to the next semester. Like finals is a unique experience for teachers. It is a rough time, folks. Like if students, if you're in school in whatever capacity, and you think finals are a tough time for you, your teachers are having a significantly more miserable experience. I will guarantee it. Especially back when I was in high school, when we were still dealing with bullshit like No Child Left Behind, which was phenomenally stupid. Though, to be fair, it's not like the education department has done really anything since then that has been considered smart. I mean, we added Common Core, which is another phenomenally stupid idea that actually had some like it had a lot more promise than No Child Left Behind. I'm going to put that out there right now. No Child Left Behind was just a failure. There was no way of redeeming it. It was a dumb idea. Common Core, the thought process behind it had some value, but it was implemented so spectacularly poorly that it was dead on arrival. And then they doubled, tripled, and quadrupled down on this really, really bad implementation of an interesting idea. I wouldn't even go as far as to say it was a good idea. It was an interesting and it was a different idea, which is where innovation comes from. But you also have to back up that interesting idea with an action plan that works, and they just didn't do that. So anyway, like, this teacher at most experienced what it was like to be a teacher twice. Like, my first holiday season in retail, like my first 2 years working the holiday season, which, if you're not familiar with that term for whatever reason, basically from mid-November through New Year's is considered the quote-unquote holiday season. The reason why is that's when, for the vast majority of retail, that's when like 60 to 70% of your sales come in. The rest of the year, you are basically prepping for that. And Black Friday specifically can make or break a store. If you do really, really well on Black Friday, the rest of the holiday season, you're going to do well as well. If you do extremely poorly on Black Friday, you are probably going to be in the red for the rest of the year. Like, that's just how it works. So my first 2 years in retail, I was doing in-store demos for kitchen gadgets, and I worked Black Friday. It was a mess, especially since the thing that I did is I had to give these 20-minute presentations and then get people to buy shit. And on Black Friday, people don't want to sit around for 20 minutes when there are sales going on. So it was weird because people want to spend shit tons of money on Black Friday, so it was easy to get them to buy once you got to that point. But getting to that point was a chore and a half. And a lot of times they would teach us how to cut down our presentations to like 10 minutes because people would just leave in the middle of the presentation if it took too long. But yeah, doing 2 years of Black Friday, I would not have even considered myself a veteran of Black Friday. It took me like 3 or 4 more years of working Black Friday to really get to the point where I'm like, okay, I now understand how this works, and I can start giving advice to other people. Or again, being a dungeon master. My first couple years of dungeon mastering, again, I was thrown into the deep end of the pool. I did convention work, and I worked at a friendly local game store. I ran their D&D program because, again, at this point, I've been in retail management for like 3 or 4 years, I think. Maybe more. I can't remember. Time is hard, folks. So I had experience in management, and running a D&D program was not that much different from running a store. And so I had an exceptionally large amount of experience in my first 2 years, and I would not consider myself an expert in Dungeons and Dragons after just 2 years. And again, for D&D, there's a significantly larger amount of repetition than in the world of teachers, where everything is done by the semester or by the year. And I've seen this a lot with, I don't know what generation it is. I don't want to say millennials or Generation Alpha or Generation whatever, because I don't know the cutoffs or anything like that. I believe I might be a millennial. I don't know because the cutoff dates keep changing. I know I was one of those people that grew up, with the idea that you would leave the house in the morning and then you wouldn't come back until, the streetlights came on. Like that was part of my childhood, which isn't a thing anymore. And, the idea of, once you were out of the house, you were completely unreachable because cell phones weren't a thing. And yeah, that's what I grew up with. I remember the first time I was able to buy my own cell phone, I wanted a really, really fancy cell phone. So I was like, no, I have a paycheck because I'd had my first job for a few months at that point. I'm like, I have a paycheck. I'm going to have a nice phone because I'd always had the Nokia brick. So I'm like, I'm going to get a fancy phone. And I got the Motorola Razr 3, I think it was. It was the coolest phone. I still have that phone, by the way. I don't throw away my phones for some odd reason. I still have my Razr. And that was the coolest phone ever. But anyway, so going back, I see this a lot with kind of the younger generation that's in their like 20s right now. For anyone wondering, how old are you? Are you like 700? No, I'm... What year is it? It's 2025. I think I'm 37. Math is hard, folks. I'm 37. So, I'm not a spring chicken. Which feels weird because it feels like yesterday that I was in my 20s. But it is what it is. So, these people like in their 20s now are, and I'm specifically going from like a content creator perspective. There are content creators is like, oh yes, I'm going to do, I'm going to be a teaching vlogger. I was a teacher for 18 months, so I have lots of things to No, you don't. That's not, you kind of, dipped your toe into the well of being a teacher. Like my teachers, when I was in high school, like I had teachers that had taught the grandparents of some of my classmates. I kid you not. One of the reasons was the town that I lived in, people just never left. And so you would have 3-4 generations of the same family just living in this town. Which is weird because the town, when I lived there, was about 20,000 people. So it wasn't like it was this tiny little, podunk place. Like it had a decent population, but like a third of that population all lived on farms. Like actual farms with crops and everything, or horses. Horses were a big deal there too. And it was Wisconsin, so dairy farms are also a big deal. But yeah, I had a teacher that taught the grandfather when the teacher was relatively new to teaching, then taught the parent of this student, and then got the student themselves. So they had taught 3 generations of the same teacher or the same student, or the same family, I guess. And so, yeah, I mean, I had, half my teachers had been teaching, like, new teachers were, like, anyone under 5 years of teaching was considered too green to, really be expected to know anything. Like, they still would make massive mistakes, and it would just be chalked up to, well, they're new. They've only been doing this for 5 years, or they've only been doing it for 3 years. They don't know what they're doing yet. And so this idea of, oh, I worked in this field, like people, talking about, it's like, oh yeah, I worked in law for like 2 years. Then you're not, are you working anymore? Well, no, now I'm a law tuber. You're not. You have no idea what you're talking about. In 2 years, how many cases could you have had? That's not enough to be considered a career. That was, a job that you had in between careers. I mean, I worked I worked as a private computer consultant for longer than most of these people were teachers, and I don't consider myself an expert on that anymore. I'm so far removed from it. And even then, the reason that I considered myself as good as I was is because I grew up with a father that was constantly teaching me how to fix computers and things like that, because every computer that we got was hodgepodged and, mangled together from, the things that were being thrown away at work or something like that. And so, yeah, I mean, I was building computers when I was, you know, in sixth grade. Um, and even then, like, I didn't consider myself. I was like, well, let me tell you about my extensive knowledge of tech support. No, I mean, I've got some stories, but I would never consider myself an expert. I never introduce myself as, hi, former tech support. No, I'm former retail manager. I did that for 10 years, but not former tech support. Or let's see, other things that I did. I worked in pizza delivery for about 2 years. Yeah, I worked as a delivery driver for 2 years. I do not believe myself to be an expert in restaurants management. I know more than most, but most of that has nothing to do with me being a delivery driver and everything to do with before my dad was a computer tech. Uh, he ran a catering company. I knew food. I knew health codes before I knew the Pledge of Allegiance. Um, I actually, when I was working as a delivery driver, I actually had to instruct the owner of the franchise that I worked at of food safety violations. Like, I had to take him into the back and I go, we can't, like, one of the things they used to do in this place, I hope they don't do it anymore. We stopped them when I was working there, is all the dough would come on these blue dough trays. Um, and each dough tray, depending on how large the dough balls were, because you'd have small dough balls, medium dough balls, large dough balls. And so depending on how large they were, you might have between 6 and 8 on a tray. And once they were done, you would, because we used a dough scraper and everything like that, once you took the dough out of them, they were remarkably clean, and they were heavy duty, food grade plastic. And so they would rinse them out, and then they would use them in the back to stack stuff in. Well, so here's the thing with food. You're not allowed to put things on the floor that people are going to eat. Things like we used cornmeal for everything. It was our nonstick item when we were working with dough. What they would do is they would take one of these dough trays, they would put it on the ground, and they would put cornmeal in it. That is a massive violation of health codes. If a health inspector came in, they would immediately shut down, because it's very, very easy for pests and other thing like that to get into that, even if you do have a relatively clean place. The codes that I'm familiar with, I don't know if this is still it, was everything had to be 6 inches off the ground and 6 inches away from any wall, because that made it the most difficult for bugs and things to be able to get into the food. And that was just one of the many food code violations or health code violations I had to inform. Like, I remember coming in and seeing it one day, because I just didn't spend much time in that area of the building. I came in and I said, who did this? And one of the other guys goes, who did what? I said, who put those in there? And I'm like, I don't know. Well, we have to take them out. Like, why? Because it's a health code violation. No, it's not. Yeah. And I went and I called the manager over and I said, hey, who did that? He's like, I did. Why? Well, that's what we do. No, we don't. That's a health code violation. We have to. And I'm like, 6 inches off the ground, 6 inches away from any wall. He's like, no, you don't. I'm like, do I have to bring up the actual text or? And so, yeah, I had to call up the owner and say, hey, we've got health code violations here, and the manager's not letting me fix them. It's like, oh, dude, this is exactly what he sounded like. I'm not kidding. He sounded like Keanu Reeves from Bill and Ted's Excellent Adventure. He goes, dude, what are you talking about? I was just there. It's working fine, dude. I'm like, no, it's not. Like, they have cornmeal just in a dough tray on the floor. He's like, yeah, it's not on the floor. I said, you don't know health codes either, do you? He's like, yes, I do. No, you don't, because health codes clearly state minimum of 6 inches off the floor, 6 inches away from any wall. This is in a corner on the ground, but it's in a dough tray, and the dough tray is 6 inches high. Yes, but the actual cornmeal is not 6 inches off the ground because it's not 6 inches thick. You just have walls that are 6 inches high that bugs can climb up. That's the whole point of 6 inches off the ground. That's why everything is done on wire racks, because it keeps airflow and all this stuff, makes it significantly easy. Please, for the love of God, just let me fix this. It will take me significantly less time to fix this problem than it will for me to explain it to you. So yeah, like I said, I've seen this over and over and over again with these kids. I call them kids. They're in their 20s. But to me, they're kids, because when I was in high school, most of them were in kindergarten or younger. And so these kids, they work something for like a year, 18 months, something like that, and go, oh, I know everything there is to know about this. And it's like, no, you don't. In no way, shape, or form can you experience everything that a career has in 2 years. You are woefully unprepared for massive aspects of the job, including the idea of burnout. Well, I burned out after like a year and a half. Well, then you did something massively wrong, because, again, I knew people in the same career field for 30, 40 years that were just starting to experience burnout. So either you did something spectacularly wrong, or you were a impressively bad fit for that job. But I don't consider that quote unquote burnout. I consider that you just not knowing how to do your job. I realize this sounds like super condescending. That's not what it's intended to be. It seems so bizarre that people can sit there and go, oh yeah, I did something for a year. I know everything to know about it. And that has never been my experience in anything. Like minimum to be able to consider yourself, I wouldn't go as far as saying an expert, but someone that can kind of give out advice because you've seen a lot. In my mind, it's 5 years. And then you don't really start feeling like you have kind of seniority until you're in the 10-year plus mark. So the idea of I did it for a year, so I know what I'm doing, just sounds interesting to hear from you guys. Do you know people, first of all, anyone that's willing to share, how long have you been in your current career field? Not the specific job, but in that career field. Like for retail management, I worked for, how many places did I work for? Like, I think 4-ish companies, I think. I don't know. My brain doesn't work super well. Some of those companies I went back to. And then I consulted as a retail manager for a little bit. So yeah, not in the same specific job, but in your career field, how long have you personally been working in it, and how long do you think it took you to really get to the point where you're like, I'm comfortable enough in this that I feel like if something happens, I'm going to be able to either expect it because it's happened to me before, or it's a rare enough occurrence that a lot of people have not experienced this. Like I said, for me, it's 5 years minimum. But I'm interested to hear: am I the crazy one? Let me know in the comments down below. Otherwise, again, that's all for me today. I will see you guys next time. All right, bye bye.